Jennifer, we've been talking a lot about how the Trump administration is going about AI policy, chip policy, but a key component of this is also competition and the agency that oversees it, the Federal Trade Commission. I think a lot of people were expecting Lina Khan's departure to mean perhaps a friendlier FTC toward tech deals, but what are you expecting in this administration?
Well, thank you for having me today. And I think when it comes to antitrust in this administration, it is important to remember that many of the antitrust cases against the leading tech companies actually began in the prior Trump administration. And what we've seen so far, particularly in the tech space, is that it seems like this administration is going to continue an aggressive approach to antitrust. Whether it was recent statements from the FTC that they plan to continue the merger guidelines that were passed under Chair Khan's FTC, or whether it's things like last week's request for information on tech censorship that brought up questions of competition and content moderation, indicating that we could again see the Trump administration FTC seeking to perhaps use antitrust enforcement as a way to try and get changes it perceives to content moderation, which could raise a lot of concerns both for tech companies, for online speech, as well as for the overall approach to antitrust in general.
We've seen some creative deals specifically in the AI space with some of the big hyperscalers taking stakes in smaller startups. Do you expect those to come under additional scrutiny in this administration as well?
The AI space is still really early in its infancy, and it's a very broad ecosystem. One of the reasons that mergers are important is not only to large companies, but to small players as well. Small players are going to need a variety of exit strategies, particularly in the AI space, and particularly when we look at the global nature of this competition. For some small players, they may be the next real innovative product that forever changes our market, and they may be seeking to IPO and go public. For others, they may be seeking to improve an existing product or operate further down the stack, and a merger might make sense. And in some cases, they may be great innovators or serial entrepreneurs who just don't want to take the time to fully run a company. As a result, we need to ensure that they have a variety of exit strategies and that we don't wrongly demonize mergers just because of beliefs in certain amounts of concentration, rather than looking at the actual impact they could have on consumers, because in many cases, mergers can benefit both small players and consumers.
I just want to go a bit broader here, Jennifer, because we are in this context of US, China, and what seems to be this competitive race, whether it's a straw man or real. Ultimately, when you think about how the administration is overseeing emerging technology, as I know you focus on, how are we seeing the US able to propel itself forward versus China when we are also seeing restrictions on sales of key technology into other countries?
One of the ways we've heard a lot of this discussion is in the approach to AI policy. The Trump administration very early on revoked the Biden administration's AI executive order, something that was seen as having a much more regulatory approach. You also recently saw Vice President Vance really pushing back against the European approach to AI that he felt would strongly impact American companies and American leadership in AI. At the same time, while there seems to be a lot of indications, particularly in the AI space, that the Trump administration plans to take a very light touch approach, there also have been some indications that we could still see regulation, particularly around issues as it might relate to labor and, again, to the kind of impact that some of these antitrust cases could have on the development of AI technology, particularly by some of our larger leading tech companies.
Okay, the larger leading tech companies, are they at the moment getting enough transparency on the future direction of policymaking, do you think?
I think it's still early in the administration. We've certainly seen a lot of statements already made, and so it remains to be seen fully what the trajectory will be when it comes to various issues around particularly AI policy. As mentioned, the Biden executive order was revoked, but we haven't fully seen what the Trump administration might plan to replace that with. On antitrust, there do seem to be clear signals that it's unlikely to have a significant change, particularly around the cases that are already filed. What remains to be seen is kind of some of the questions around, we had started to hear rumblings around potential competition investigations in, for example, the AI space. And given some of the other comments, is that the type of thing where we will see antitrust enforcement really directed at kind of the concerns related to content moderation or at concerns related to quote unquote big tech companies, which could have significant impacts on the future of antitrust policy as well as on consumers? Or will we see something that's much broader, the way that we saw, for example, in the Biden administration under Lina Khan's FTC?
Jennifer, as you mentioned, you spent a lot of time thinking about content moderation. Where do you see that going in an administration that has really decried woke social media and AI models?
It will be interesting to see particularly how the changes from the prior Trump administration in the social media marketplace might impact the positioning that we see towards content moderation. Elon Musk, of course, has bought X and made significant changes to content moderation policy there. We've also recently seen Mark Zuckerberg saying that he's making significant changes to Meta and Facebook's content moderation policy. And of course, President Trump himself now has Truth Social, which has a very different content moderation policy. We continue to see a great amount of competition in the content moderation policy space. However, we did recently see this request for information from the FTC around text censorship, which could raise concerns that we could see the administration or the government via the FTC seeking to intervene into the speech rights of Americans and into the rights of private actors to make decisions around the content that they host.
Jennifer, you sat in Washington, but take it out to the States for a minute, because we had a key guest yesterday, Victoria Espinel. She's over at the Business Software Alliance yesterday, really talking about how important the states are at regulating AI at the moment. Is there a disconnect there?
There certainly has been a lot of state-level activity around AI. Several hundreds of bills have already been introduced or considered at a state level, and this is something to certainly watch, because a state AI patchwork could impact the overall development of this industry, particularly when we're looking at bills like we saw last term in California or Colorado that could really impact the development side as well as any potential deployment. This is important not only for large players who may be operating across state lines, but of course will certainly impact small players and in their ability to even launch their products in various states.